She tried to belittle a quiet veteran in front of everyone, until one story flipped the entire class against her. In silence, he held a power she never saw coming. She mocked him publicly, assuming a war veteran had no value, until he stood tall, shared a single unforgettable story, and changed every mind in that room. Tariq Holloway rarely spoke of his deployment days. By 19, he'd already faced experiences far beyond anything his classmates at Lakewood Community College could imagine. As a former U.S. Army specialist, he returned home focused on one goal: start over, attend college, and pursue a quiet dream: journalism. He wasn't flashy. No medals, no stories told loudly. Nothing in his appearance hinted at the battles he'd survived. Unless asked, you'd never guess he was a vet. Most didn't ask. He stayed low-key, punctual, and sat mid-row, present but invisible. Tariq had signed up for Introduction to American Literature, more out of obligation than interest, but stories that revealed truths about human fear, pain, and silent strength had started to speak to him. Maybe it was what he'd witnessed overseas. Maybe he simply wanted to make sense of the world. That semester's first Monday had the usual chaos. Students browsing syllabi, checking phones, attempting awkward small talk. Then Professor Patricia Elwell entered, and the noise dropped. She looked straight out of an academic film. Tweed blazer, wire-rimmed glasses, and an energy that warned against foolishness. Her intro was brief, icy. No greetings, no warmth, just rules. She spoke with a clipped precision that made some students stiffen. When calling roll, she halted at his name. "Tariq Holloway, you're the veteran, right?" she asked without glancing up. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Her mouth twisted, barely a smile. "Well, let's see if you remember how to write essays instead of field reports." A few uneasy laughs followed. Tariq said nothing. She ignored him after that, but the moment lingered. It wasn't rage he felt. He'd endured worse. It was the fact that her comment didn't need to be said at all. She dismissed him without reading a word. But in trying to silence him, she only amplified his voice. When the time came, Tariq didn't raise his voice. He raised the room's awareness. She hadn't read a sentence he'd written, yet somehow believed she knew exactly who he was. From the first week, she'd already chosen his label. Still, Tariq did what he always did, stayed focused, took notes, and submitted his assignment on time. It was a thoughtful analysis of a short story centered on post-war trauma. He didn't share his own history, but his understanding stood out. Yet when the paper came back, it was marked with more red than he expected. The grade? A plain C. No real feedback, just a scribble. Needs depth. He accepted it in silence, but his mind was turning. Was it his writing? Or something else beneath the surface? He didn't jump to conclusions. He was trained to watch, not react. But as days passed, little signs piled up. Each time he raised his hand, she'd interrupt before he could finish. If he mentioned anything military-related, she'd sigh, redirect, or shut it down. It wasn't loud or direct, just subtle, precise dismissal. The kind that only someone in authority could use so smoothly. Still, Tariq stayed composed. He'd faced far worse in far harsher places. But this was different. Here, people were present. They saw. And still, no one said a word. What neither he nor they realized was that something quiet and powerful was forming. And soon, Tariq would turn that still tension into a moment the class would never forget. Not through shouting, not from anger, but by stripping away silence, assumptions, and uniforms, and revealing a man who knew what was real and wasn't afraid to speak it when the time was right. By the second week, The strain between Tariq and Professor Elwell had become obvious, at least to those paying attention. It began with her skipping over his name, even when his hand was raised. Then came the sharp comments, the clipped tone every time he managed to say something. On the surface, it seemed like a teacher maintaining control, but anyone listening closely could hear something more beneath it. It was a Wednesday afternoon. They were discussing The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, a story not just about soldiers and weapons, but the weight of emotion they carried. Professor Elwell stood front and center, marker in one hand, book in the other. "This is fiction," she said firmly, circling a passage on the board. "It's metaphorical, not anyone's personal war diary." Then she turned, almost like an afterthought. "Mr. Holloway," she said, "I'm sure you have some first-hand insight you'd like to share." She called him out like it was a challenge, not a question, then penalized him for doing exactly what she asked. What started as silence became a quiet stand for respect. Her tone didn't invite a response. It dared one. It was less a question, more a spotlight she controlled at will. Tariq straightened slightly in his seat. "I think the emotions in this story are true, even if the plot itself isn't. Guys I served with, they carry more now than they ever did in combat." Some heads in the room nodded in quiet agreement. Elwell didn't. She gave a closed, forced smile and said, "Well, this isn't a support group. We're here to study literature, not reminisce about military service." That one stung. The air grew heavy. A shuffle came from the back row. Still, Tariq didn't react. He scribbled something in his notebook, eyes locked on the board. But he was paying attention. He caught the shift in her tone when she spoke to him versus others. The way her jokes about discipline or obedience always seemed aimed his way. Once, during a class reading, he missed a word, and she said, smiling, "Too many drills, not enough dictionaries." It wasn't the kind of smile that softened a room. By the third week, it wasn't just Tariq who noticed. Aaron, 2 seats over, leaned in during a break. "What's her deal with you?" Tariq shrugged. "I don't think she has one." Aaron's expression said he wasn't convinced. "Well, if she came at me like that, I'd report it in a heartbeat." Tariq was grateful for the backup, but he wasn't built like that. Being underestimated was nothing new. He could take it until it crossed the line. That line came the next Monday. Their assignment was to connect a personal moment to a theme from the reading. Tariq spent 2 nights on his response. He chose fear, not the kind that follows gunfire, but the one that lingers in the silence afterward. No graphic details, no names or missions, just the weight of what followed him home. He printed it out, stapled it, turned it in on time. When the essays came back, his again wore a red C. This time 2 words at the top. Too personal. He read them once, twice, a third time. Too personal. The very thing the assignment had asked for. Others had written about heartbreak, grief, childhood pain. Yet somehow his reflection crossed the line. At that point, it wasn't about a grade anymore. It was about dignity, about being seen. After class, he waited until the room cleared out. He walked calmly to her desk. "May I ask," he said steady, "what you meant by too personal?" I thought the prompt encouraged self-reflection. She told him to be less emotional, but what she really meant was, be silent. Tariq wasn't loud, but his truth carried more weight than anything in the syllabus. She didn't meet his eyes as she packed up her briefcase. "It did," she replied. "But certain experiences carry baggage. They cloud objectivity. Next time, try choosing a topic with less emotional weight." "I thought that was the point," Tariq answered evenly. Her briefcase snapped shut. "Tariq, this is a place for academics, not a military outpost. You'd be wise to understand the difference." And with that, she walked away, heels clicking across the floor. He remained still for a moment, alone. Not humiliated, not furious. Just sure now. This wasn't about essays. This wasn't about intellectual rigor. This was personal. And one day, when she crossed that invisible line again, he would answer. Not with anger, not with noise, but with something she and everyone else would remember. Something that echoed his name for all the right reasons. By week 4, Tariq's steady presence had begun to earn quiet respect. He never argued, never snapped. But those nearby, those who saw his papers, heard his insights, they noticed. He didn't speak often, but when he did, it landed. His writing was sharp, honest, and built on lived experience. But none of that changed Professor Elwell's attitude. If anything, she escalated. Her remarks became sharper, more pointed, and now more public. During a class on postmodernism, she explained that truth in literature is often subjective. Then she posed a question. Can anyone share a time when truth was shaped to serve a story? Tariq raised his hand. She hesitated, sighed audibly, then called on someone else. After a pause, she turned back to him. Fine, Mr. Holloway. His voice was steady. There was a mission we ran. The official press release said it was clean, no harm. But in truth, civilians were hurt. The report matched the narrative, not the reality. The room went quiet. You could feel it. That kind of honesty didn't show up in textbooks. Professor Elwell tilted her head, calculating. So you're admitting your own military misled the public? Tariq nodded. Yes, ma'am, it happened. She arched a brow. Fascinating. And yet you still chose to serve it. A hush swept through the room. Students glanced at one another, unsure if they'd heard her right. The meaning wasn't vague. It was calculated and cutting. Tariq clenched his jaw, but didn't take the bait. Instead, he answered evenly. I served so people could speak freely, even if that freedom sounds like this. A few heads nodded, but Elwell wasn't finished. She turned to the whiteboard and muttered, Blind loyalty and literature rarely mix. That landed hard. It wasn't feedback. It was a jab. A direct shot meant to wound. After class, Tariq lingered. In the hallway, Erin caught up to him. She crossed the line. File a complaint. Tariq shook his head. I'm observing. That's enough, for now. But watching didn't mean silence. At home, he began documenting. He noted the comments, the context, and who was there. This wasn't revenge. This was preparation. 2 days later, the class was split into groups to interpret sections of Beloved by Toni Morrison. Tariq's team chose a powerful passage about memory and trauma. Halfway through his presentation, Elwell interrupted. I'm going to stop you there, she said, stepping forward. This reading is too literal. Trauma isn't just about physical wounds, Mr. Holloway. Some of us have studied this for decades. It's not just something bad happened. Now I'm sad. Tariq remained silent, but his group tensed beside him. She smiled as if she'd just delivered a helpful tip. This is why we read. To rise above ourselves, not cram personal backstories into every line. It wasn't subtle anymore. She was dismantling him in front of everyone. Still, Tariq showed up. Same seat, same calm. And with every paper, his voice got sharper. His next essay, on silence and the things they carried, was clean, structured, well-sourced. He received another Red C. In the margin, lacked scholarly depth. But he knew better now. It wasn't his work. She'd made her mind up. To her, he wasn't a student. He was a symbol, one she didn't respect. Yet he never lost his cool. That wasn't who he was. Instead, he prepared. He started visiting other professors, quietly asking for critiques. He took his essays to the resource center. The feedback, clear, precise, impressive. It wasn't the writing. It was the bias. This wasn't about learning. It was about control. And that grip was slipping. Because soon Tariq wouldn't just prove her wrong. He'd make her regret ever underestimating him. By midterm, the classroom felt like a cold war. Elwell maintained her air of authority. Tariq met it with unshakable calm. He didn't argue. He didn't fold. But he never gave in either. It came to a head during what should have been a routine class debate. Topic: morality and war narratives. Each student was assigned to argue and defend a position. When Tariq's name was called, he rose calmly, walked to the front, and laid his notepad on the lectern. He took a breath, steady and deep, then began. I'd like to explore the idea that morality in war isn't black and white. Eyes turned toward him, the room stilling. In the things they carried, the character Norman Boker wrestles with guilt and duty. That struggle between personal conscience and staying alive. That's not fiction for all of us. He paused, scanning familiar faces. I've known men who made the right call and still couldn't sleep. And I've known others who followed every order, never asking why. Literature gives us a space to question that. For once, the room wasn't just listening. They were absorbing. This wasn't performance. It was real. Then came Elwell's voice, sharp and cool. So, your claim is that morality becomes flexible during wartime? Tariq nodded. I believe it's constantly tested. Sometimes it cracks. She stepped forward, arms crossed. And how do we as civilians verify these moral struggles? Are we meant to just take a soldier's word for it? Her tone dripped with condescension. You understand, Mr. Holloway, that literature isn't a mirror for self-validation. Silence. Everyone knew what she was doing, framing his lived experience as an academic liability, that it wasn't literature unless stripped of humanity. Tariq looked at her evenly. Professor Elwell, you assigned this debate. You asked us to examine morality in war, through our own lens. She tightened her stance. And I expect sources, not sentiment. That was it. He picked up his notepad, stepped forward, and set it aside. I hadn't planned to share this, not out of shame, but because I didn't think it fit, until now. He faced the class, voice steady. 2 years ago, I was deployed to a remote village in eastern Afghanistan. One night, a roadside bomb killed 2 of our translators, young local men, friends, who helped us build trust with the community. We knew who was behind it, and we knew where they were. But our commander told us to hold back. So we waited. We did nothing. He let the silence speak. By the time we got word they'd moved on, the village was gone. The families, the people we'd built something with. They fled, terrified. We followed orders. We didn't fire a shot. And still, we lost everything. Not a single sound from the room, not even from Elwell. That's what war is, he said softly. It's not always about what you do. Sometimes it's about what you don't do. That's what Bowker is grappling with in the novel. The invisible choices that haunt you after. Then he turned back to her. So no, you shouldn't accept anyone's story blindly. But don't dismiss a voice just because it doesn't come footnoted. Elwell didn't speak. For once she had nothing. Then, from the back of the room, Louise clapped, once, twice. Others followed. It wasn't loud, but it carried weight, not for drama, but out of deep respect. Elwell's face didn't flinch, but something in her posture gave way. The control she held so tightly had cracked. Tariq returned to his seat quietly, opened his notebook like it was any other day. But it wasn't. Everyone knew it. Even her. The energy in the room afterward was electric, unspoken. People glanced at him differently now. Some with admiration, some with guilt for having stayed silent. Elwell said nothing of the applause, nothing of the shift. She dismissed the class with a stiff smile, gathered her things, and left without looking his way. But her silence said enough. Her grip on the room was gone. That night in his small apartment, Tariq replayed it all. Not to relive it, but to let it settle. He wasn't someone who felt proud easily. But this was different. It wasn't just about telling his truth. It was about standing firm in it. No raised voice. No slamming doors. And still, it landed. But he knew it wasn't over. Elwell wasn't the kind to back down, not out loud. If she was going to try to reclaim control, she'd do it subtly. So instead of waiting for the next undermining remark or another mysteriously low grade, Tariq moved first. The next morning, he scheduled a meeting with Dr. Lena Corbin, head of the English department. She was known for her calm, precise nature, a woman who didn't waste time or words. Tariq arrived prepared. A folder of graded papers, feedback from the Student Writing Center, and weeks' worth of notes he'd kept. He wasn't angry. He was ready. "I'm not here to get anyone fired," he said plainly. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I just want fair grading, and to be treated like a student, not a symbol." Dr. Corbin listened quietly. She flipped through the papers, asked a few sharp follow-up questions, and finally leaned back in her chair. "Let me be clear," she said. "I respect how you've handled this. You could have gone straight to the dean, filed a formal complaint. But you brought evidence, not outrage. That speaks volumes." Tariq nodded. "I was trained to stay calm under pressure, but I won't stay silent when something's wrong." She studied him for a long second. "I'll review what you've submitted, and I'll be sitting in on your next class." That surprised him, but he appreciated it. This wasn't about punishment. It was about restoring balance, making the classroom what it was meant to be, a place to challenge ideas, not identities. That Thursday, Dr. Corbin walked into the lecture hall just before class began. Elwell froze for a heartbeat, then forced a smile. "I didn't realize we had company," she said lightly. "I like to do the occasional drop-in," Corbin replied, casual. "But the air in that room, anything but casual." Elwell chose her words carefully. No jabs, no snide interruptions. When Tariq spoke, she let him finish. Class ended without incident, but the message was clear. The days of unchecked control were over. A week later, Corbin called him back. "I've reviewed your papers," she said. "I also had a senior faculty member assess them. You should have been earning B's and A's." Tariq waited. "She's agreed to revise your grades and issue a written acknowledgement of bias in how your work was evaluated. It won't go on her permanent record, but it will be kept on file. More importantly, you won't face further penalties from this." He nodded. It was more than he expected. "You handled this with integrity," she added. "I'd like to nominate you for the department's writing award. And there's a small journalism scholarship you're eligible for, if you're interested." He allowed himself a rare smile. "I am." That night, Tariq walked home the same way as always. Not faster, not taller, just steady. He hadn't yelled, hadn't stormed out, hadn't played the victim. He'd simply stood his ground. And now the same classroom that once tried to shrink him had become the place where he proved he belonged. Not for the uniform he'd worn in the past, but for the person he chose to be now. By finals week, the atmosphere had shifted completely. No formal announcement, no apology. But the difference was clear. Elwell was restrained, her tone more professional, her edge dulled. She no longer called him Mr. Holloway like a challenge. No more passive-aggressive remarks. No more lingering stares when he raised his hand. She had gone silent. And from someone like Elwell, that silence wasn't indifference. It was surrender. Tariq noticed, but he didn't gloat. He showed up early, participated, held his ground with even more clarity. Other students started gravitating toward him, not out of pity but respect. Aaron began sitting beside him each class, trading notes and quiet jokes. Louise, the one who first clapped during the debate, started asking for his feedback on her writing. For the first time, Tariq felt like he was part of it, not just in the room, but in the community. A few days before the final exam, an email arrived from the financial aid office. He'd been awarded the Howard S. Monroe Journalism Scholarship, just enough to cover next semester's books and part of his tuition. Attached was a short note from Dr. Corbin. "Your story matters. Keep writing it." He printed it out and tucked it into the back of his notebook. Then came the last day of class. Elwell followed her routine, passed out exam booklets, gave her instructions, then paused. "For what it's worth," she said, not meeting anyone's eyes, "I appreciate the effort many of you have shown this semester." The words landed awkwardly, but they landed. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. Tariq didn't need more. He wasn't there for apologies. He'd already won, on his terms. After the exam, he waited until the room had emptied. Elwell sat at her desk, sorting papers. He approached quietly. "I just wanted to say, I hope the next student like me doesn't have to go through what I did." She looked up. No mask this time, just something close to understanding, maybe even guilt. "I'll keep that in mind," she said softly. He nodded, turned, and walked out of the classroom one final time. Outside, the air was crisp. Campus hummed with students packing up, saying goodbye, heading home. Tariq sat beneath a bare maple tree, watching it all unfold. He flipped open his notebook, past pages of red ink, scrawled thoughts, and quiet victories, until he reached a blank page, and at the top he wrote 5 words. "This is just the start." He didn't know exactly what came next. A reporter, a columnist, maybe even an author. But he knew this. His voice was his. And no professor, no grade, no thinly veiled jab could ever take that away. The class was about fiction, but what he walked away with was real. The strongest rebuttal isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, consistent, earned. And sometimes the most powerful answer is to rise above, dignity intact, and keep walking.